The great cathedrals of the Middle Ages should not be standing. Their challenge was a simple, crushing equation: how to span enormous distances with the immense weight of stone. For centuries, builders were trapped by gravity, their spaces low, dark, and confined. Then, a series of quiet revolutions changed everything. This is the story of 20 specific structural innovations that solved that ancient puzzle. By the end, you will understand the hidden language of force and stone that allowed humanity to literally reach for the sky. We will see how these methods redirected weight across impossible spans, transforming thick, windowless walls into frameworks of light and air. What looks like magic was actually a meticulous craft of distribution and balance. In the shape of an arch unlock such soaring heights? What invisible arms of stone hold up walls of fragile glass? The answers lie in a forgotten engineering genius that still defines our skylines today. What does it take to build a dream out of stone? That puzzle was solved by a single, elegant change of shape. The round arch, a legacy of Rome, had served humanity for 1,000 years. It is a perfect half-circle, and its beauty lies in its symmetry, but that very symmetry was its weakness. When you place weight on a round arch, the force does not travel straight down. It pushes outward aggressively at its sides. You can feel this if you press down on the top of a cardboard tube. It wants to bulge out at its middle. A round arch does the same thing. To hold that outward push, the walls supporting it had to be massive, thick, and windowless, like a fortress bracing against a siege from within its own structure. This was the Romanesque world, powerful but earthbound. Then, a new geometry arrived, and with it, a new direction for civilization. The pointed arch, the defining signature of Gothic architecture, is not just a stylistic choice. It is a structural revolution. Think of its shape, two arcs meeting at a sharp peak. This geometry is a masterstroke of redirection. The force from above, instead of pushing outward along a wide, lazy curve, is now channeled more directly downward. The sides of the arch become steeper, so the thrust vector, the line of pushing force, points more toward the ground and less toward the neighboring wall. It is the difference between trying to hold open a heavy, round door and simply guiding a falling pole straight down into a socket. This single innovation changed the entire equation. With the outward pressure dramatically reduced, the walls no longer needed to be brutish bulwarks. They could become taller, they could become thinner. Most importantly, they could now be pierced with openings because their job was shifting from sheer, stubborn mass to elegant, directed support. The pointed arch was the first and most critical key, unlocking the stone cage and letting in the light. It established a new principle that weight could be persuaded, guided, and tamed rather than merely opposed. But an arch alone, even a pointed one, is just a doorway. How do you turn that principle into an entire sky? Yet an arch is only a line in space, a single curve defining a passage. To create a ceiling, you need a surface, a stone sky overhead. For this, medieval builders initially turned to the vault. The earliest and simplest form was the barrel vault, essentially a continuous round arch stretched down a hallway. It created a heavy, tunnel-like space, dark and imposing, because its weight pressed down uniformly along the entire length of the supporting walls. The next evolution was the groin vault, formed by the intersection of two barrel vaults at right angles. This created four curved panels, and crucially, the weight concentrated along the groin lines, the ridges where the vaults met. This was better, but still limited. The groins were not true structural ribs. They were just the seams where the masonry surfaces met, and the entire mass of the stone ceiling still had to be supported. Then came the conceptual leap that would frame the Gothic universe, the rib vault. This was not just a new type of ceiling, it was a new way of thinking about structure. Before the infill stone, the web, was even laid, the masons would first construct a skeleton of arched stone ribs. These ribs, often made of finer, harder stone, were the permanent, load-bearing bones of the vault. Think of an umbrella. The fabric is the web, but the metal spokes are the ribs, channeling all the force down to the central pole. In a rib vault, these stone ribs do exactly that. They gather the immense weight of the entire vault ceiling and funnel it with precision down onto a few key points, the sturdy piers or columns below. This transformed the building from a solid mass into a true skeleton. The spaces between the ribs, the web, no longer had to be massive, load-bearing slabs. They could be filled with lighter stone, or as ambition grew, they could be opened up entirely. The rib vault created a map of force, a visible diagram of where the weight was traveling. And once you know the path the weight takes, you can design everything else around it. The wall between those weight-bearing points was suddenly free, no longer crushed under a ceiling of solid stone. It was a revelation written in geometry. The moment the heavy, earthbound mass of the building began to dissolve into a framework of light. But a skeleton needs more than just a spine. It needs arms to hold it steady. The rib vault concentrated the ceiling's weight down onto the piers, but it created a new and dangerous problem, a powerful sideways push at the very top of those slender walls. Picture the immense stone ceiling, now funneled by the ribs, pushing down and out at the points where the vaults met the wall. This outward thrust, if left unchecked, would simply shove the tall, glass-filled walls outward until they collapsed. The Romanesque solution was to make the walls too thick to move, but that would defeat the entire Gothic dream of light. The genius of the Gothic masons was to realize they did not have to fight this force within the wall, they could catch it from the outside. They externalized the support, and in doing so, they invented the most dramatic innovation in architectural history, the flying buttress. Its anatomy is a lesson in elegant engineering. It begins with a massive vertical pier, rooted deep in the ground, standing apart from the main building. From the top of this pier, a graceful, arching stone arm, the flyer, leaps through the air to connect with the cathedral's high wall at the exact point where the vault's thrust is greatest. This arch in the sky acts as a bridge for force. It catches the wall's desperate push outward and redirects it along its own curve, down through the vertical pier and safely into the earth. The wall itself is now free. It no longer has to resist. It is simply held in place by this external brace. This is why the flying buttress is not merely decoration. It is the fundamental reason those breathtaking walls of stained glass exist at all. The clerestory, the upper level of windows that floods the nave with colored light, is structurally possible only because the flying buttress is outside, doing the heavy work of resisting the vault's thrust. The wall becomes a delicate screen, a canvas for light and narrative, because its structural duty has been handed off to these stone athletes standing in the aisles. It is a complete reimagining of what a building is, where strength is not hidden within mass, but expressed as a dynamic counterbalance in open air. Yet even the flying buttress had a hidden vulnerability. That graceful stone arm leaping through the air was under immense stress, not just pushing down but pulling and twisting. The thrust from the wall, channeled along the flyer, created a powerful rotational force at the top of the vertical pier, threatening to topple the entire support system outward. The solution to this final instability was a masterstroke of functional sculpture, the Pinnacle. From a distance, these stone spires look like pure decoration, elaborate stone crowns atop the buttress piers. But their true purpose is deeply structural, a clever application of pre-stressing. A pinnacle is incredibly heavy, often carved from dense stone and rising to a sharp point. This immense weight is placed directly on top of the buttress pier, acting as a constant, powerful downward force. Think of it as a paperweight, but for an entire architectural system. That downward load does something brilliant. It pins the pier in place. By adding this massive vertical pressure, the builders counteract the sideways pull from the flying arch. The pinnacle's weight pushes the pier more firmly into the ground, increasing its friction and stability, making it far more resistant to being tipped over by the vault's thrust. This is the principle of pre-stressing, using a controlled, permanent force to strengthen a structure against the variable loads it will face. The pinnacle essentially leans on the buttress, telling it to stand straight and resist the push. Without this final, elegant counterweight, the entire delicate balance of thrust and counter-thrust could fail, as the buttress itself might buckle or sway. So the pinnacle is not an afterthought. It is the keystone of the external support system, the final anchor that locks the flying buttress into its vital, unmoving position. It transforms the pier from a potential pivot point into an unshakable anchor. This reveals a profound truth of Gothic engineering. Every element, even the most beautiful and seemingly frivolous, is a calculated component in a vast, invisible machine for redirecting force. The building becomes a dynamic equilibrium, a frozen moment where upward aspiration is perfectly balanced by downward gravity, all choreographed in stone. So the map of force was now clearly drawn across the vaulted ceiling, a network of stone ribs channeling weight downward. But for this elegant system to work, the ground floor had to speak the same language. The simple, round columns of the Romanesque era were no longer sufficient. They were a single, blunt answer to a question that had become beautifully specific. The Gothic builders responded with a masterclass in organized support, the compound pier. This was no longer just a column, it was a vertical assembly, a bundle of stone members each with a dedicated purpose. At its core was a central, sturdy pillar, but growing from it, like branches from a trunk, were slender, attached shafts of stone called responds. Each one of these responds was not decoration, it was a designated path. Look upward from the floor of a great cathedral, and you will see this logic in action. A specific rib from the vault above, perhaps one of the diagonal ribs from a quadripartite vault, descends from the ceiling and lands with perfect precision upon the top of one of these responds. The respond then carries that singular line of force uninterrupted all the way down its own length, merging seamlessly into the core of the pier, and from there straight down into the foundation. It is a direct, unbroken line of communication from the heavens of the vault to the earth below. This organization transformed the structure from a mystery into a legible diagram. You can literally see where the weight is going. Each element, from the highest rib to the lowest respond, has a partner, a dedicated stone companion ensuring the load never gets lost or misplaced. This efficiency was revolutionary. Instead of a monolithic column bearing a chaotic, generalized load from the entire ceiling above, the compound pier distributed and sorted the forces with elegant clarity. The central core handled the main downward weight, while the attached responds managed the specific thrusts from their assigned ribs. This division of labor allowed the piers themselves to become more refined, more complex in shape but more intelligent in function. The entire building began to resemble a living organism, with a skeletal system of bones, ribs, and tendons, each part perfectly aligned to carry its share of the load. The compound pier made the invisible visible, turning the abstract mathematics of force into a tangible, vertical grammar of stone. But a wall of glass presents its own terrifying problem. The great windows were not simply holes cut into stone, they were structural voids that threatened the integrity of the entire wall above them. How could a delicate screen of colored glass hold up the tons of masonry looming over it? The answer lies in a breathtaking fusion of art and engineering, an innovation that turned the window itself into a load-bearing wall of light stone tracery. This evolution began cautiously. Early Gothic windows, in the style called plate tracery, were essentially a solid stone wall with a few circular or lancet-shaped openings punched through it. The stone between the openings was still the primary structure, thick and heavy like a Swiss cheese block. It was a window, but the wall was still very much in charge. Then came the conceptual leap to bar tracery. Here, the builders reversed the logic. Instead of carving holes out of a solid plate, they constructed the window opening from a framework of slender stone bars. These bars, like the ribs of a vault, were the primary structure. They formed the elegant, branching patterns of geometric or flowing designs, and the glass panels were then carefully fitted into the spaces between them. The stone was no longer the leftover material, it was the intentional skeleton. This skeleton, however, had to grow stronger as ambitions grew taller. The ultimate expression of this idea is found in Perpendicular Gothic. Look at a window from this era, and you see a grid, a rigid, rectangular framework of millions of stone that stretches from sill to arch with mathematical precision. This is no longer just decoration, it is a load-bearing lattice. The millions of stone, the vertical bars, act like tiny, continuous columns. The transoms, the horizontal bars, function like stone lintels or beams, tying the whole grid together into a single, incredibly stiff panel. This grid does something miraculous. It distributes the weight of the wall above the window across its entire framework, channeling it safely down the millions and into the sturdy sill below. The window becomes a transparent wall, as structurally sound as one made of solid stone but made of light. It is the logical endpoint of the Gothic quest, where the material dissolves into pattern, and pattern itself becomes the structure. This intricate stone web is the static cousin to the dynamic curves of the fan vault, both proving that strength in Gothic architecture was never about brute mass, but about intelligent geometry, about creating a rigid framework so efficient it could make the heaviest materials seem to vanish into air and color. Stone, however, was not the only material that dreamed of impossible spans. In the great halls of castles and palaces, where kings and nobles gathered beneath towering ceilings, another material whispered of warmth and grandeur: wood. Here the challenge was different but no less daunting. How do you roof a vast, open hall, perhaps 40 or 50 feet wide, with timber beams that simply do not grow that long? The answer, born not from quarries but from forests, was a masterpiece of carpentry that defied logic: the hammerbeam roof. Its genius is in its deception. At first glance, it appears to be a single, breathtakingly wide arch of timber, but look closer and you see its clever secret. From the top of the stone walls, a short, stout horizontal beam, the hammerbeam, projects inward into the hall. It does not reach the center, it is far too short for that. But from its outer end, a massive curved brace sweeps upward and inward, meeting a vertical post. This assembly creates a rigid triangular bracket that seems to hang in mid-air. Another hammerbeam projects from this post, and another curved brace leaps even higher, creating a second tier. This step-like progression, this series of cantilevered brackets, builds the roof outward and upward in stages, like a stone vault built in wood. The weight of the vast roof, the heavy timber framing, and the slate or lead covering is now carried by this intricate dance of forces. The hammerbeam itself is in compression, being squeezed by the load from above. The curved brace is also in compression, pushing that force back down and outward toward the wall. But there is a hidden hero, often a long iron tension rod or a massive oak tie beam running across the base of the structure, pulling everything together and preventing the whole assembly from simply splaying outward. It is a perfect equilibrium of push and pull. The result is a roof that appears to float, a wooden sky unsupported by any central columns, leaving the hall below completely open for ceremony and spectacle. It is the Gothic principle of directing force along a precise skeleton, translated from the silent logic of stone into the warm, resonant language of oak and elm. This was not merely a roof, it was a declaration, proving that the ambition to enclose vast space with grace was a universal language, spoken in timber as fluently as it was in tracery and glass. The warmth of timber and the cool logic of stone both shared a common enemy, the tyranny of the right angle. A square room wants a square ceiling, but a dome, that symbol of the heavens, is a perfect circle. For centuries, placing a round dome atop a square base was architecture's most stubborn geometric puzzle. The simplest early solution was the squinch, a small arch or lintel built across each corner of the square, effectively chopping off the corners to create an octagon, a shape much closer to a circle. It was a functional but awkward compromise, a series of small, visible brackets that interrupted the purity of the space below. Then, in the hushed, golden light of Byzantine churches, a more elegant and revolutionary answer emerged, one that seemed to dissolve geometry itself. This was the pendentive. Look up into the dome of a building like Hagia Sophia, and you will see it. The dome rests not on walls but on four great arches that form a square. In the curved triangular spaces between the tops of these arches and the base of the dome, you see smooth, curved stone surfaces. These are the pendentives. They are not merely decorative filler, they are structural magicians. Each pendentive is a concave, spherical triangle. Its genius is in its curvature. It acts as a continuous, seamless transition, a geometric translator. The round base of the dome sits perfectly upon the ring formed by the upper curves of the four pendentives. The immense, uniform weight of the dome is gathered by these curved triangles and channeled with incredible efficiency down their sides, concentrating the load precisely onto the four sturdy piers at the corners of the square below. It is as if the dome's weight is poured down four invisible funnels. This innovation did more than just solve a structural problem, it transformed human experience of space. The squinch acknowledged the conflict between square and circle. The pendentive resolved it into harmony. Because the support was now focused entirely on the four corner piers, the walls between them were liberated. They could be opened with vast arches or filled with windows, creating an interior that felt miraculously unified. A single, soaring volume capped by a floating celestial canopy. The pendentive made the dome appear to hover, as if by divine will, over a space of breathtaking openness. It was a silent, stone declaration that the most impossible spans are bridged not by force, but by a deeper understanding of form. The soaring ambition of Gothic architecture created a new kind of wall, one that was no longer a solid barrier but a delicate, layered composition. To truly understand its strength, you must read it like a musical score from the ground up. The grand arcade of the nave, with its towering columns and compound piers, forms the powerful bass note, the foundation of the vertical rhythm. Above it, often set back within the wall's own thickness, is the middle register, the Triforium. This is not merely a decorative band of arches. It is a hidden corridor, a secret passage woven into the very fabric of the structure. This gallery, running the entire length of the cathedral, served a profound dual purpose. First, it was a stiffening rib within the wall itself. By creating this internal void framed by stone, the builders introduced a horizontal brace, a rigid gallery that tied the entire building together laterally. It resisted the subtle swaying and shifting that could threaten such a tall, slender structure, acting like a stabilizing belt cinched around the cathedral's waist. Second, it was a brilliant piece of practical engineering. This corridor provided crucial access for maintenance, allowing workers to inspect the windows, clean the glass, or adjust the protective shutters without erecting precarious scaffolding from the nave floor far below. But its most important role was in the elegant distribution of load. The Triforium gallery sits directly beneath the clerestory, that breathtaking upper level of windows that floods the space with light. The weight from that high wall and from the roof trusses above it is transferred down through the masonry. The Triforium, with its robust internal framing, receives that load and helps spread it laterally before channeling it safely down to the massive piers of the arcade below. It is a mediating layer, a transitional zone that gathers and organizes the forces from above, ensuring they descend to Earth in an orderly, manageable fashion. This three-part elevation, arcade, triforium, clerestory, is the complete structural sentence of Gothic design. Each level speaks to the next, a continuous conversation of support that transforms a perilously tall wall of glass and stone into a stable, luminous reality. The light does not simply pour in, it is earned through a meticulous, layered engineering that makes the impossible feel effortless. The delicate tracery of the perpendicular window was the triumphant end of a long and cautious evolution. To understand its skeletal brilliance, we must return to the very beginning of the Gothic experiment, to a time when builders first dared to cut significant openings into their newly slender walls. Their initial tool was stark and simple, the Lancet window. Imagine a tall, narrow opening pointed at the top like the blade of a surgeon's lancet, hence its name. These were not yet the great walls of color we envision, but slender slits of light, often grouped in twos or threes along a chapel wall. Their form was pure structure, the pointed arch in its most direct application, channeling weight cleanly downward. But even in these modest openings, ambition stirred. Builders began to group 2 or 3 lancets together under a single, larger encompassing arch. This created a unified composition, a framed triptych of light. Yet the critical structural detail lay in the stonework above them. The area between the top of the lancet arches and the curve of the master arch above was not empty. It was filled with a solid, flat slab of stone, pierced only by a small, round opening, a quarterfoil or a simple circle. This is plate tracery. The name is perfectly descriptive. The stone between the windows is a solid plate, a piece of the wall that has simply been decoratively carved. This plate is absolutely load-bearing. It is the wall itself, continuing upward to support the masonry above. The windows are, in essence, elegant holes punched through this enduring stone fabric. This was a revolutionary but transitional step. It demonstrated a desire for more light, for unified composition, but it had not yet unlocked the true secret. The wall, though pierced, was still fundamentally a wall. The plate tracery window is a beautiful hybrid, caught between the old world of mass and the new world of framework. Its solid stone plate bears the weight stoically, like a Romanesque wall that has learned to wear lace. Yet, by grouping the openings and framing them as one, it planted a crucial seed of an idea. It asked the question that would define the next century of innovation. What if the stone between the windows was not leftover wall, but the primary support itself? The answer to that question would dissolve the plate entirely, replacing it with a slender, purposeful skeleton of stone bars, and in doing so, finally set the glass free. The logical endpoint of the rib vault is a ceiling that seems to bloom from the walls. While the continent perfected the soaring verticality of the pointed arch, English masons pursued a different kind of ambition, one of breathtaking horizontal elegance. Their masterpiece, the ultimate expression of stone as both structure and sculpture, is the fan vault. To understand it, look up into the ceiling of King's College Chapel. You will not see the intersecting diagonal ribs of a traditional quadripartite vault. Instead, you see what appears to be a series of immense concave stone fans, their delicate ribs spreading out in perfect, identical curves from a central point high on the wall. This is not merely decoration, it is a structural funnel of sublime efficiency. Each fan is, in essence, a concave cone or half-cone of stone. All of its many ribs are identical in curvature, radiating from a single hanging pendant or from the wall itself like the spokes of an umbrella turned inside out. This geometry is a miracle of distribution. The weight of the entire vaulted ceiling is gathered by this radiating web of ribs and channeled evenly, uniformly, down the curving sides of the fan. The force does not concentrate at a few key points, as in earlier vaults, but is spread across the entire semicircular footprint of the fan, flowing smoothly down into the walls or supporting columns below. This even, predictable distribution of load is what allowed fan vaults to span astonishing widths with an appearance of effortless grace. The structural logic gave birth to an artistic revolution. Because the ribs were all identical curves, they created a continuous, unbroken surface, a perfect canvas for the stonecutter's art. The spaces between the ribs, the web, could be intricately carved with delicate patterns, tracery, and even hanging pendants, because the ribs themselves were doing all the fundamental work of support. The ceiling transformed from a framework into a woven stone tapestry, a frozen cascade of geometry. The fan vault represents the final, confident word in the Gothic quest to dematerialize structure. It proves that the most enduring strength lies not in hidden mass, but in a geometry so refined, so perfectly understood, that it can turn the crushing weight of a stone sky into a canopy of ethereal, repeating beauty. Even the most brilliant designs could miscalculate the relentless patience of gravity. Centuries after their completion, some of these stone giants began to whisper their distress, their walls subtly leaning, their vaults developing a faint, worrying sag. The solution was not to tear down and rebuild, but to intervene with surgical precision, inserting a new kind of bone into the architectural body. This was the strainer arch, a retrofit born of necessity and deep structural insight. Unlike the flying buttress, which works from the outside in compression, the strainer arch works from the inside in tension. Imagine it as a great stone belt cinched tight across the nave of a cathedral. It is a transverse arch running from one side wall to the other, high up in the building's interior. But its purpose is not to support a vault, it is to actively pull the walls back toward each other. As the walls of a wide nave slowly spread apart over time, pushed by the outward thrust of the vaults, the strainer arch is inserted to counteract that movement. It functions like a permanent stone turnbuckle. The weight of the arch itself and the careful way it is keyed into the existing masonry creates a state of tension. It is constantly pulling inward, a silent, steadfast force working against centuries of outward creep. A famous and dramatic example can be seen in Wells Cathedral, where two great strainer arches form a striking X shape high under the central tower. They are not a part of the original Gothic vision, they are a brilliant 14th century correction. The builders recognized the tower was pushing the four supporting piers apart, threatening collapse. Their answer was to connect these piers with these massive stone braces, effectively lashing the structure together from the inside. This demonstrates a profound leap in engineering understanding. It shows that medieval builders had moved beyond simply channeling weight downward. They had learned to actively manipulate forces within a living structure, to diagnose weakness and prescribe a cure in stone. The strainer arch is architecture as medicine, a testament to the fact that the true test of genius is not just in creation, but in the wisdom to preserve it. Before the arch learned to fly, it had to learn to crawl. Long before the elegant curves of Rome or the soaring points of Chartres, builders across the ancient world solved the problem of spanning an opening with a method of breathtaking simplicity and brute force, the corbelled. Imagine a stone wall, but instead of building it straight up, each new layer of stones is placed slightly inward from the one below, overhanging by just an inch or two. Repeat this process course after course, and the two sides of the wall slowly creep toward each other, like two stone hands leaning closer until the fingertips finally meet. This is corbelling, the architecture of the stair-step. It creates a corbelled arch or a corbelled roof, a structure built not on a principle of curve and thrust, but on sheer, stacked compression. Every stone is locked in place by the immense weight of all the stones above it, each one pressing down and inward, pinning the one below it. the entire structure is a monument to vertical load, with the weight distributed straight down through the wall itself. You can see its powerful, primitive logic in the massive beehive tombs of Mycenae, where concentric rings of stone step inward to form a soaring domed chamber, or in the cantilevered balconies of medieval towns, where timber beams project from a wall to support a room overhanging the street. The corbel is a cantilever in its purest form, a beam or slab anchored firmly at one end, holding weight out into empty space. But this strength comes with a fundamental limitation. A corbelled structure is static. It works because it is heavy, because it is compact, because its force travels in a near vertical line. Contrast this with the revolutionary principle of the true arch. A true arch is not a stack, it is a chain. Its wedged stones, the voussoirs, are in a state of dynamic equilibrium. They push against each other laterally, transforming vertical load into outward thrust, a living, breathing force that must be contained by buttresses or thick walls. The corbel crushes, the true arch dances. The corbel achieves its span through accumulated mass, while the arch achieves its span through redirected energy. This is the critical evolutionary step, the moment builders stopped merely piling weight and began to persuade it to make gravity work for them by cleverly balancing its own forces. The corbel was the answer when the question was how to reach across a gap with what you had in your hands. The true arch was the answer when the question became how to make stone defy its own nature. The corbel's static logic met its match in the ambition of Rome. To span the vast interiors of their baths, basilicas, and aqueducts, Roman engineers perfected an elemental form, the true barrel vault. Its principle is elegantly simple. Take a robust round arch, the kind that could frame a triumphant gateway, and extend it along a straight axis. The result is a continuous tunnel of stone, a majestic, unbroken ceiling that evokes both grandeur and profound confinement. This was the architecture of empire, capable of enclosing spaces of awesome scale. But that scale came with a terrifying structural consequence. Remember, a round arch inherently pushes outward at its haunches, its sides. Now amplify that single point of thrust along the entire, seemingly endless length of the tunnel. A barrel vault does not just push outward in a few places. It exerts a constant, uniform lateral pressure along both of its long walls. It is a siege engine built into the ceiling itself, perpetually trying to shove the walls apart. The Roman solution was the only one available when facing such an unyielding force, sheer, uncompromising mass. The supporting walls for a barrel vault had to be monumental, thick enough to act as immovable buttresses in their own right. Often, they were not even free-standing walls in the modern sense, but were essentially carved from the living earth, the vault itself buried into a hillside or nestled against a solid bank of terrain. The weight of the world itself became the buttress. You can see this logic in surviving Roman structures, where the windows are small, deep-set slits, if they exist at all, because piercing those crucial load-bearing walls would invite catastrophic failure. The space inside, while impressive in its span, is inherently inward-looking, shadowy, and heavy. The barrel vault solved the problem of covering space, but in doing so, it created a prison of its own making. It represented a magnificent dead end in structural thinking, where the only answer to thrust was more mass, more earth, more wall. This architectural reality shaped the Romanesque era that followed, an age of powerful, sombre churches with narrow windows and cavernous, tunnel-like naves. The barrel vault was a master of enclosure, but it whispered no secrets of liberation. Its very perfection posed the question that would haunt builders for centuries: how do you escape the tyranny of the wall? The rib vault's skeleton required a specific blueprint. The earliest and most enduring design was the Quadripartite vault, a masterpiece of elegant simplicity. Picture a rectangular bay, the space between four supporting piers. Across this ceiling, two diagonal stone ribs cross each other, forming a perfect X. This single gesture divides the vaulted surface into four triangular or trapezoidal cells, the webbing that fills the spaces between the ribs. The structural logic is beautifully direct. The weight of the entire vault ceiling is gathered by these two diagonal ribs. They meet at the central boss, a carved stone keystone that locks them together, and from that point, the load is split into four clear paths. Each rib carries its share of the weight down to one of the four corners of the bay, landing precisely on a dedicated shaft of the compound pier below. This created a rhythmic, modular system. Builders could repeat this four-part vault bay after bay, marching down the nave in a steady, predictable cadence. Each pier received an equal and balanced share of the load from two adjacent bays, making the design robust and relatively straightforward to engineer. The quadripartite vault was the workhorse of early Gothic, a reliable and elegant solution that translated the principle of directed force into a repeatable pattern. But ambition soon demanded a grander scale. To cover wider bays, especially in the broader naves of some great churches, a more complex variant emerged, the Sexpartite vault. Its name reveals its geometry, a vault divided into 6 cells instead of 4. This was achieved by adding a third major rib, a transverse rib that ran across the width of the bay at its center. Now, the two diagonal ribs did not cross in the middle of the bay. They each intersected this new transverse rib. The result was 6 panels of webbing, a more intricate ceiling pattern. This innovation changed the entire structural conversation. The load path was no longer shared equally 4 ways. The central transverse rib now carried a significant portion of the weight from the crown of the vault, channeling it down to additional supports on the side walls. This meant that along the nave, the support system alternated. A heavy pier designed to carry the load from the transverse rib would be followed by a lighter pier that only received the diagonal ribs. This created an alternating rhythm of strong and weak piers, a syncopated beat in the architecture's vertical music. The Sexpartite vault was a bold experiment in spanning greater width, but its asymmetric load distribution made it more challenging. It required a more complex pier system to manage the unequal forces, and that alternating rhythm could feel less unified than the steady march of the quadripartite design. In the end, the simpler, more balanced quadripartite vault proved more versatile and enduring, becoming the true backbone of the Gothic skeletal system, while the Sexpartite remained a magnificent but less common variation, a testament to the period's restless experimentation with form and force. A building's vertical ambition finds its ultimate expression in the bell tower. This is not merely an ornament placed atop the church. It is the structural heart of the entire composition, a massive, concentrated load that must be anchored with profound care. Constructing such a tower began not with stone, but with earth. Before the first foundation stone was laid, workers would dig down, often through layers of unstable soil, until they reached solid, immovable bedrock. Into this trench they would pack a deep raft of rubble and mortar, creating a platform far wider than the tower's footprint. This subterranean mass was the silent, unseen anchor, a counterweight to the skyward aspiration, ensuring the colossal vertical pressure would not cause the entire structure to slowly sink or tilt into the earth. The tower itself, rising from this base, acts as a gigantic, continuous column. Every stone in its thick walls contributes to a single, overwhelming purpose, channeling the unimaginable weight of spire, bells, and masonry straight down into that prepared earth. But the tower's greatest enemy is not gravity. It is the invisible, relentless push of the wind. A spire, that needle of stone aimed at heaven, presents a vast sail area to the storms. To survive centuries of gales, it could not be a solid mass that would be too heavy and catch too much wind. Instead, the spire was engineered as a hollow stone skeleton, a lattice of ribs and panels often built around a central mast of timber. This framework allowed the wind to partially pass through, reducing the force, while its geometric rigidity distributed the remaining lateral pressure. The wind's push against the spire's side is transformed, traveling down through the intricate stone web gathered by the spire's base and then delivered as a complex, twisting load into the top of the tower below. To prevent this force from splitting the tower apart, medieval builders employed internal reinforcements. The interior of the tower was often divided by a series of sturdy vaulted ceilings at different levels, each one acting as a rigid diaphragm, bracing the four walls together from the inside. Furthermore, the corners of the tower, the points of greatest stress, were frequently fortified with extra thickness or with specially bonded stonework. These reinforced corners became the building's primary columns, the robust vertical lines that received the final, combined load of downward weight and sideways thrust, guiding it safely on its long, unwavering journey from the trembling spire tip down to the silent, steadfast bedrock. While the cathedral mastered the heavens, another stone language was spoken down by the river. Here, the challenge was not to lift the gaze upward, but to connect two shores against the relentless push of water and traffic. Bridge builders faced the arch's ancient nemesis, thrust, in its most elemental form. Their ingenious response was to flatten the curve, creating the segmental arch. Unlike the soaring half-circle of a Roman aqueduct, a segmental arch is a shallow arc, a mere segment of a full circle. This subtle change in geometry was a profound calculation. A shallower arch directs the line of thrust more steeply downward into the abutments, the supports at either end. It significantly reduces the horizontal outward push that threatens to topple the bridge's shoulders into the river. This allowed for wider, more stable spans without needing impossibly massive, fortress-like supports on the banks. The weight of the bridge and its load was persuaded to travel more directly into the earth. Yet even with this clever shaping, the piers standing in the riverbed itself had to be colossal to resist the accumulated thrust from multiple arches. Building them solid, however, would create a dam, a wall against the river's fury during floods. The solution was a masterpiece of adaptive design, the hollow, vaulted pier. Look at the enduring skeleton of a medieval bridge or the majestic tiers of the Pont du Gard. The piers are not solid blocks. They are structured like miniature buildings, with open arches or vaulted chambers built right through their core. These are not decorative passages, they are vital pressure valves. When the river swells, the floodwaters are not forced to batter against a solid obstacle. Instead, they flow freely through these openings, drastically reducing the scouring pressure on the pier's foundation. The pier maintains its massive footprint and weight to anchor the arch's thrust, but it becomes permeable, a collaborator with the current rather than a victim of it. This union of the segmental arch and the vaulted pier represents civil engineering in harmony with natural force. It is the Gothic principle of intelligent weight distribution translated to the horizontal plane, where the enemy is not gravity alone, but gravity married to the flow of water. The bridge does not merely cross the river, it engages in a centuries-old dialogue with it, its hollow bones allowing the torrent to pass while its flattened arches quietly channel the weight of 1,000 journeys safely into the stone below. Wooden skeletons held up their own kind of sky, while stone vaults conquered the heavens of cathedrals. Another form of triangulated genius was quietly shaping the world below the rafters, in the vast halls of barns, churches, and great manor houses. Here, the material was not stone but timber, and the challenge was the same: how to span a wide room without a forest of interior columns cluttering the space. The answer was a principle so fundamental it shapes bridges and bicycles today: the triangulated truss. Its most essential form is the king post truss. Picture a simple triangle. The two sloping sides are the principal rafters supporting the roof itself. At the bottom, a horizontal beam, the tie beam, connects the two walls, holding them apart. Now add a single vertical post, the king post, connecting the peak of the roof triangle down to the center of the tie beam. This simple addition transforms everything. The weight of the roof pushes down on the rafters, trying to force them to splay outward and collapse. But that downward force is now captured by the geometry. The rafters, under compression, push inward and downward against the king post. The king post, also in compression, pushes straight down on the tie beam. Crucially, the tie beam itself is now in tension, being pulled taut like a bowstring, holding the walls firmly together against the rafters' outward thrust. This elegant division of labor is the magic of triangulation. It creates a rigid, unchanging shape where every member has a dedicated role, either squeezing or stretching, to manage the load. For even wider spans, a more robust system emerged, the queen post truss. Here, two vertical posts, the queen posts, stand on the tie beam, supporting a horizontal beam, the straining beam, which in turn supports the rafters at 2 points. This creates multiple, smaller triangles within the larger frame, distributing the load even more efficiently across a broader area. The result was a roof that was astonishingly light and strong, a web of timber that could stretch over a threshing floor or a palace gallery without a single interior pillar. The timber truss was the democratic counterpart to the stone vault, a practical, replicable formula for enclosing space that required not the quarry and the master mason, but the forest and the carpenter. It proved that the principle of directed force was universal, a language spoken as fluently in oak and pine as it was in limestone and tracery. The same principles that lifted cathedrals into the light were also forged for a darker purpose, to withstand a storm of fire and force. Military architecture in the high medieval period became a brutal, practical application of distributing and redirecting load, not from vaults, but from the impact of trebuchet stones and the patient menace of the siege tower. The ultimate expression of this defensive geometry was the concentric castle. Picture not a single fortified wall, but a series of them, nested inside one another like stone rings. Each wall or curtain was a complete, independent defensive line, often separated by a wide, open space called a bailey. This design was a masterclass in the distribution of force. An attacking army could not focus its entire assault on a single point. Even if the outer wall was breached, the attackers found themselves trapped in a killing zone, exposed to arrows and missiles from the even higher inner walls on all sides. The force of the siege, both physical and tactical, was dissipated across multiple layers, each one having to be overcome individually. It was a structural echo of the rib vault, where a single, crushing load is broken into multiple, manageable channels of resistance. Within these walls, the shape of the towers told another story of redirected force. The traditional square keep, with its flat sides and sharp corners, presented a clear target. Its corners were structural weak points, vulnerable to the patient work of sappers who could dig tunnels to undermine them, causing a catastrophic collapse. The round tower, however, was a revolution in defensive form. Its continuous, curved surface presented no flat plane for projectiles to strike squarely, causing stones to glance off at unpredictable angles. More importantly, it had no corners. This meant there was no single, vulnerable point for mining. The weight of the tower was distributed evenly around its entire circumference, flowing down the curved wall in a continuous, unbroken line of compression into the foundation. A sapper trying to undermine a round tower would have to collapse the entire, balanced ring of masonry at once, a nearly impossible task. The round tower was a perfect cylinder of force, its geometry ensuring that every stone in the wall shared the burden of defense equally. In the concentric castle and its round towers, we see the Gothic mind applied to a problem of pure survival. It was no longer about persuading weight to soar, but about compelling violence to slip and scatter. proving that the deepest understanding of structure is always ultimately about control. The greatest innovations are often the ones we never see. For all the soaring ambition of the arches and the delicate tracery of the windows, the entire cathedral rests upon a hidden world, a subterranean engineering of profound necessity. This final structural innovation does not reach for the sky, but instead embraces the earth, ensuring the stone dream above does not slowly sink into the ground. The immense, concentrated weight of every pier, every buttress, every wall had to be safely delivered into the soil. The solution was to create an artificial footprint far larger than the building itself, a foundation that would spread the load like a giant stone snowshoe. This began with the crypt, the chambered space beneath the choir or altar. More than a sacred resting place, the crypt was a structural gift. By excavating down to stable ground and building a network of low, robust vaults, the masons created a rigid, distributed platform. This underground layer effectively turned the concentrated load of the columns above into a broad, even pressure across the entire excavated area. It was the first step in persuading the earth to accept the burden. But for the most critical points, the massive piers and tower bases, something even more robust was required. Builders would dig down past soft topsoil, often using oak pilings driven deep into waterlogged ground to reach a firmer stratum. Upon this, they constructed a foundation raft, a wide, thick pad of layered stone and mortar. Sometimes this pad incorporated reclaimed materials, fragments of older buildings or rubble, carefully packed and bound together. This was not mere recycling, it was a deliberate engineering choice, creating a heterogeneous mass that would settle evenly and lock together over time. The goal was simple but monumental: to transform the knife-edge pressure of a towering pier into a gentle, widespread embrace with the ground below. Every stone in the vaulted ceiling, every pane of stained glass, ultimately depends on this silent, dark conversation between layered stone and stable earth. The cathedral's true genius lies in this complete vision, a perfect chain of distribution from the tip of the spire, down through the dancing ribs and flying arms, to finally rest, secure and eternal, upon foundations that taught the earth how to carry a mountain of stone and light. This journey through stone reveals a single, unifying truth. Each arch, each rib, each flying arm was part of a deliberate and evolving language, a grammar of force perfected over centuries. These 20 innovations were not random flashes of genius, but a cumulative conversation between builders, a slow-motion revolution where every solution posed a new question, and every answer lifted the ambition higher. They solved the ancient, crushing equation of weight and spanned through a philosophy of redirection, not opposition. The goal was always transcendent: to carve out spaces of light, height, and awe that spoke to the human spirit. What began as a problem of physics became an art form of balance, a frozen dance between gravity and aspiration. These structures still stand, not as relics of a superstitious past, but as enduring testaments to brilliant, iterative problem-solving. They are stone textbooks, their lessons written in vaults and tracery, so the next time you stand before one of these medieval marvels, look past the grandeur. Look for the map of force, the skeletal logic, the quiet engineering that taught stone to defy its own nature. See the ribs channeling weight, the buttresses leaping to catch it, and the walls dissolving into colored light. In that vision, you are not just seeing architecture, you are witnessing a foundational moment in our shared imagination, a proof written in limestone and faith that no span is truly impossible.